There is a protocol for everything at Buckingham Palace. For the changing of the guard, protocol. For a visiting head of state, protocol. For a fire in the East Wing, a medical emergency in the corridor, a drunk tourist who scaled the fence at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. Protocol, protocol, protocol. Nobody wrote a protocol for this. Nobody wrote a protocol for the moment a 9-year-old princess pressed her face against 3 inches of blast-resistant glass, her mouth open, her small fists white-knuckled and hammering, and screamed a word that every guard on the perimeter heard, but nobody, not one of us, was supposed to act on without authorization from command. Help. Just that. One word. The kind that rewires something in your chest before your brain has caught up. I have spent 11 years standing posts where nothing happens. 11 years perfecting the art of not blinking, not swaying, and not existing in any way that might suggest I am a man rather than furniture in a red coat. I have trained for threats that come from outside the walls. Threats with weapons, with vehicles, with ideology and malice and documented intent. I was not trained for the threat that was already inside. I was not trained for Sergeant Declan Marsh. What he did in the next 4 minutes violated 6 standing orders, 2 palace directives, and 1 unspoken rule older than the regiment itself. He also saved her life. I'm still not sure those 2 things cancel each other out. The East Corridor smells like old money and floor wax, and on damp mornings like this one, something faintly organic that no one at the palace ever acknowledges. Mildew, maybe. Or history. I've stopped distinguishing between the 2. I am Captain Rhys Alderton, attached to the Household Division as a liaison officer, which is a title that means, in practical terms, that I carry a clipboard, observe posts, and write reports that nobody reads until something goes wrong. On the morning of March 14th, I was conducting a routine perimeter assessment of the inner residential corridor. East face, ground floor, post 7. Sergeant Declan Marsh was standing post 7. I noted him in my log at 9:04. Bearskin straight, shoulders squared, chin precisely parallel to the floor. Not up, which would be arrogant, not down, which would be lazy but level, and which is what 11 years of conditioning produces. His boots had a shine on them that made me slightly ashamed of my own. There was a small scratch along the left side of his cuirass that I recognized from 3 weeks prior when he'd caught the edge of a door hinge during a transition drill and taken the mark without complaint. I'd logged it then. I logged it again now. This is what I do. I log things. I am very good at logging things and very bad at the thing that happened next. And the royal family was in residence. It was a Tuesday, which meant the corridors were quieter than weekends. Staff moved efficiently, no tours, reduced foot traffic. The Princess Royal and her children were scheduled for a private morning. No engagements until 11. The East Corridor was, by every metric I had, inert. I was 3 posts down from Marsh, writing 9:06, post 7 nominal in my log, when I heard the first impact. Not loud. That's what I keep coming back to. It was not the sound of a crisis. It was the sound of a small hand hitting glass, a muffled, flat percussion, the kind a child makes when they want attention, the impatient knock of someone who expects to be let in. I looked up. The window to my right, east-facing, triple-glazed, blast-rated, installed after 2003 at considerable expense, had a small face pressed to it. Princess Charlotte, 9 years old. Dark hair loose around her face, which was the first wrong thing. And because Charlotte's hair was never loose during residence mornings, she had a protocol for that too. Hair tied, always. Her mouth was open. Her hands were hitting the glass. I stood there for what I will log, honestly, as approximately 2 seconds, but which felt like the full span of a geologic era, processing the image in front of me. The disconnect between the setting, grand corridor, morning light, palace quiet, and the thing happening in the window refused to resolve into meaning. My brain kept offering alternatives. She's playing, She's waving. She's doing something children do that I don't understand because I don't have children and never will because I spend my Tuesday mornings logging bearskin alignments. Then she screamed the word. I couldn't hear it through the glass. I read it. Help. Marsh moved before I did. This is the thing I have to say clearly, because I've been asked to account for the timeline by 3 separate people since the incident. But in clarity matters, Sergeant Declan Marsh moved before I did, before the duty officer, before the 2 guards on the flanking posts, before anyone with rank or authorization or a radio. He moved the way water moves through a crack, without announcement, without drama, finding the path entirely on its own terms. He was at the window in 4 steps. I want to describe what 4 steps looks like when a man in full ceremonial kit breaks from post position because it is not graceful. And the bearskin hat shifts. The chin strap cuts. The cuirass, 22 pounds of ceremonial plate, does not move with you. It moves slightly after you, like an argument you started. His boots hit the marble floor with a sound like punctuation. Heavy. Decisive. Wrong for the corridor where sound was supposed to be managed, measured, contained. He pressed his hand flat to the glass and looked at her. I need to stop here and say something about Marsh that is not in any file. How? Because files don't carry this sort of thing. He had a daughter, 7 years old. I knew this not because it was logged anywhere official, but because he'd mentioned her once, exactly once, during a post-transition briefing when someone's radio had played 15 seconds of a children's song before being silenced, and Marsh had said, "That's my daughter's favorite," with the particular tone of a man who is trying very hard to sound like the information is minor. He said it once. I logged it, because I log everything, and then I filed it under personal details, non-operational, and moved on. I was thinking about that file when he put his hand to the glass. Charlotte's eyes found his. She pointed behind her, into the room. Marsh turned and looked at me. 11 years of post-discipline in his face and underneath it, in the set of his jaw, in the thing happening behind his eyes, something that had nothing to do with protocol. "Sir," he said, "I need authorize—" The second impact from inside the room stopped his sentence. Not a hand on glass this time. Something heavier. A body, maybe. Or a piece of furniture. The sound came through the floor more than the air. A low, structural vibration that I felt in my molars before I consciously registered it as a sound. Charlotte dropped away from the window. The frame shuddered. I had my radio up before I'd decided to raise it. "Control, this is Alderton, Post 7. East Corridor, ground floor. Possible incident, inner residential. Alderton, confirm, what is the nature—" Marsh was already looking at the window. He was not looking at me. He was not looking at his radio or his sidearm or the duty officer's post 40 meters to our left. He was looking at the dimensions of the glass, width, mounting, frame age, with the expression of a man doing mathematics he has not been asked to do and will not be thanked for completing. "Don't," I said. He looked at me again, just once. A look that said with complete clarity and zero hostility, "I know exactly what you mean and I know exactly what it will cost and I am going to do it anyway." Not recklessness. Something worse. Certainty. He used his elbow. The technique exists. I know it exists. I have read about it in tactical breakout documentation. But I had never seen it performed in full ceremonial kit on blast-rated residential glass. The documentation does not cover that configuration. So first strike, the glass held. A white star crack spread from the impact point. Marsh pulled back, reset, struck again. Same point, shoulder rotation behind it this time, the cuirass slamming forward with his body weight. The glass gave on the second blow, not a clean break. Blast-rated glass doesn't break clean. It collapses, folds inward in a layered pattern, the outer pane spider-webbing while the inner laminate stays partially intact. And the hole that results is ragged and sharp and the kind of thing you are not supposed to put a human body through. Marsh went through it anyway. I heard his sleeve tear. I logged it. I don't know why I logged it. Force of habit, possibly, or the need to impose some form of order on a moment that had entirely abandoned order. He dropped into the room. The room was one of the smaller private sitting rooms on the residential floor. Pale walls, antique furniture. There a fireplace that was decorative and cold, bookshelves along the east wall. I could see through the open frame of ruined glass. I could see marshland, recover his footing, and I could see, for 3 seconds before my view was blocked by his body and the angle of the room, the figure on the floor. Not Charlotte. Charlotte was in the corner, pressed against the bookshelf, her knees drawn up, her face doing something I could not look at for long. The figure on the floor was a man. Palace staff ID blue lanyard. The kind that gets you into the residential corridors on a Tuesday morning when traffic is light and logs are nominal and everything is, by every metric, inert. He was not moving. I don't know what happened in that room in the 90 seconds before Marsh reached it. I know what Charlotte told the duty officer later, in fragments, in the careful way that 9-year-olds reconstruct things that were not supposed to happen to them. I know what the forensic report said. I know what was found in the man's jacket pocket. What I logged, in the moment, looking through a shattered palace window at Sergeant Declan Marsh, standing between a child and a collapsed body, was this: 9/11, post 7. Deviation from standing post position. Unauthorized use of force against palace structure. Situation contained. 3 lines. It took me 4 attempts to write contained without my hand shaking enough to make the word illegible. The duty officer arrived at 9:13. 2 minutes. It felt like I'd been standing at that broken window for the better part of my career. Commander Voss behind him, and behind Voss, the particular silence that descends when people with rank arrive at a scene and begin calculating very rapidly the distance between what happened and what the paperwork will say happened. Voss looked at the window. He looked at me. He looked at Marsh, who was standing inside the ruined room at parade rest. Parade rest, as if the glass wasn't around his boots, as if his sleeve wasn't torn to the elbow, as if the whole morning hadn't just rearranged itself into something none of the protocols had anticipated. "Sergeant," Voss said. "Sir." "You left your post." "Yes, sir." Voss looked at Charlotte in the corner, at the man on the floor, at the blue lanyard. Something moved behind his eyes that he filed away immediately, the way men like Voss file things, not in a log, not on paper, somewhere interior and inaccessible. "Your assessment," Voss said. Marsh said nothing for a moment, the kind of nothing that is its own form of precision. "She knocked, sir," he said finally. "Seemed like the right door to open." I wrote my report that evening, 14 pages, every timestamp, every observable action, every procedural deviation, every regulation cited and cross-referenced. I am very good at reports. It is, arguably, the thing I am best at. I wrote it and read it back, and it was accurate and thorough, and it described exactly what happened. And it felt like a photograph of a fire. Technically correct, and entirely incapable of transmitting heat. There is a scratch on Marsh's cuirass that I've logged twice now. It's going to need to be polished out before the next formal inspection. I find myself not wanting to log that it's gone. What I didn't include in the 14 pages, what I have included in nothing, what lives in the space between the lines of every report I've written since, is what happened at 9:15. And after the duty team had secured the room, after Voss had made his calls, after Charlotte had been moved to a secondary room with 2 female officers and a doctor. Marsh was standing in the corridor again. Not at post. Just standing, the way a man stands when the adrenaline has finished with him and left him with the invoice. He was looking at his hand, the one he'd put flat to the glass before he broke it. There was a cut along the heel of his palm, the glass on entry, probably. Not deep. Not dramatic. The kind of wound that gets cleaned and forgotten. He looked at it like it was something else entirely. I didn't say anything. There was nothing in my log for the expression on a man's face when he's standing in a palace corridor in a torn ceremonial sleeve looking at his own hand. Some things you have to just let sit there, unlogged, unresolved. I'm still learning that. There are 47 panes of glass on the east residential face of the palace. I know this because I counted them the morning after. Stood in the garden in the cold, mist off the lawn, palace rising above me in its particular gray and gold way, and counted every single pane from ground to second floor. 47. I don't know what I was looking for. I found one that was boarded. Post 7 window, east corridor, ground floor. Replaced within 18 hours. Blast-rated glass takes 8 hours to source and 4 hours to install correctly. Someone had made phone calls in the night. Someone had moved quietly and efficiently and at considerable expense to return that window to a state of normalcy, as if the specific configuration of broken glass and a man's elbow and a child's face could be smoothed over with new laminate and proper sealing compound. I stood there in the garden looking at the new pane. It was cleaner than the others. Still had a faint factory sheen. I logged it. 47 panes. One newer than the rest. The debrief was held in the third-floor conference room at 1400 the following day. 8 people around a table, Commander Voss, the duty officer, 2 representatives from Palace Security Administration, a woman from somewhere in the government whose title I was not given and did not ask for, and Sergeant Declan Marsh, who sat with his hands flat on the table in front of him and looked like a man who had decided before he walked in the door exactly what he was going to say and exactly what he was going to withhold. I was there to present the timeline. My 14 pages, my timestamps. I was not there as Marsh's advocate or his judge. I was there as a clipboard. Voss opened by saying that the preliminary assessment had confirmed an incursion by a palace staff member whose clearance had been forged, not recently, not sloppily, but with a degree of sophistication that indicated resources, patience, and inside knowledge of the vetting calendar. He said this the way you'd say there's a chance of rain. The woman with no title wrote something on her notepad. Then Voss looked at Marsh. "The review of your actions will be formal," he said. "Oh, that is unavoidable. You understand this?" "Yes, sir." "You deviated from standing post position. You damaged palace structure. You entered a restricted residential room without authorization. You engaged physically. I stood between a child and a man who had his hands around her wrist," Marsh said. He said it the way you state a coordinate. Not defensively, not emotionally, the way you report a fact that you are confident will remain a fact under any pressure applied to it. Voss looked at him for a moment. The woman wrote something else. The duty officer examined the wall above Marsh's head with great concentration. "Your record is exemplary," Voss said finally. "I know, sir. This incident will complicate that." Marsh said nothing. His hands were still flat on the table. I noticed, because I notice things, it is my particular affliction, that the cut on his right palm had been closed with 2 small adhesive strips and was already beginning to bruise around the edges in a color that had no business being on a human hand, a deep yellow-purple that looked botanical, like something that blooms in bad conditions. I presented the timeline. All 14 pages, every timestamp. Nobody at the table looked at me the way they looked at Marsh. I was the record. You don't look at the record. You use it and set it aside. This has always suited me fine. But somewhere around page 6, 909, second impact, structural vibration confirmed, the woman with no title stopped writing and looked up at me and said, "Captain Alderton, in your assessment, the delay between the first visual contact with the subject through the window and Sergeant Marsh's deviation from post, You log this as 4 seconds. Yes. And in those 4 seconds, what was your own response? I had been waiting for this question. I had been waiting for it since I started writing the report, and I had not written an answer to it in 14 pages because the answer was not a timeline entry. I was processing the situation, I said. And Marsh? I looked at him. He was looking at the table. He was already moving, I said. They let him keep his rank. I found this out 3 days later, via a memorandum that crossed my desk in a stack of 12 other memorandums, none of which were about Marsh. The formal review had concluded. Findings, deviation confirmed, justification acknowledged, no further disciplinary action, return to post duties pending psychological evaluation clearance. One paragraph, the kind of paragraph that buries a man's entire moral calculus in administrative language and moves on. I read it twice, filed it, went back to my work. I couldn't concentrate on my work. Went and got a coffee from the staff room, which I never do because the staff room coffee is made in a machine that sounds like it's resolving a personal grievance, and stood by the window looking out at the garden. 47 panes, new ones still cleaner than the rest. The thing I kept returning to was not the incident itself, not the glass breaking, not the body on the floor, not the blue lanyard with its forged credentials. The thing I kept returning to was the 4 seconds. 4 seconds between Charlotte's face appearing at the window and Marsh moving from post. In 4 seconds, I had raised my radio and begun processing authorization protocols. In 4 seconds, Marsh had already committed. I have spent 11 years being very good at my job. My job is to observe, to log, to report, to facilitate the machinery of protection from a position of useful distance. I am not a trigger. I am not a door. I am the record that someone else's action gets written into. I don't know if that's a thing to be proud of. I don't know if I've ever known. Charlotte went back to her normal schedule 6 days after the incident. I know this because her routine is part of the residential coordination log that crosses my desk on Mondays. 9:30, morning lessons. 11, riding. 13, lunch with Her Royal Highness. The ordinary machinery of a child's ordinary Tuesday through Sunday, reconstituted and running. I was in the East Corridor when she came through with her governess on the 7th day. She was wearing a blue dress, hair tied, everything correct. She stopped when she reached post 7. Marsh was there, back at post, bearskin straight, chin level, the scratch on his cuirass still visible. The new glass behind him had a factory sheen. His armor had a memory. Charlotte looked at him for a moment with the particular gravity that 9-year-olds deploy when they have decided something is important. Then she said something I was too far away to hear. Marsh, at post, is not supposed to respond to anything that is not a direct operational command. He responded. I don't know what he said. I was logging post 9 at the time, 40 meters down the corridor, and the acoustics in that hallway swallow words and leave only tone. What I can tell you is that it lasted approximately 3 seconds and that Charlotte nodded, a single, serious nod, the kind that closes a conversation that both parties understand, and then walked on with her governess and did not look back. Marsh returned to his previous position, chin level, shoulders squared, bearskin straight. I stood there for a moment with my pen on my clipboard. Then I wrote 9:47, post 7 nominal. The woman with no title came back. Not to the 3rd floor conference room this time. To my office, which is small and has no window and contains, besides a desk, a filing cabinet and a chair, approximately 11 years of logged reports stacked in a way that my assistant calls organized and which I know to be a geological record of my own career. She sat across from me and placed her notepad on her knee, closed and said, "The man on the floor, the one with the blue lanyard." Yes. He didn't act alone. I waited. We're not going to find all of them quickly. Some of them are very patient. I waited more. The forged credential was specific to that Tuesday, to that rotation, to that corridor. She paused. Let the specificity of it sit in the room. Someone told them which window to use. The word window landed differently than she probably intended, given everything. I watched her watch me absorb it. The review of your post logs, she said. The full archive. I'll need them. How far back? She looked at me for a moment, then she said, How far back do you have? 11 years. I have 11 years. I went home that evening and sat at my kitchen table and did not log anything. This was unusual. I logged things at home. Ambient notes, personal observations, the kind of notation habit that has long since stopped being professional discipline and become just the way I process being alive. My kitchen table has a coffee ring on it from a mug I set down too hard in November of last year. I've logged the coffee ring twice. I did not log anything that evening. I sat and thought about corridors, about the 47 panes of glass, about the one that was cleaner than the others, about the particular shape of an institution that moves so fast to restore normalcy that the restoration becomes its own kind of evidence. Look, we have already replaced it. Look, the window is already whole. Look how quickly we return to protocol. About the 4 seconds. About what it means to be the record versus the action. About whether those are always different things. About Marsh at post 7. Chin level. Bearskin straight. Scratch on his cuirass that nobody had polished out. About the woman with no title and her closed notepad and her 11 years question. About Charlotte's nod. The one that closed a conversation, the one that said, Us between a 9-year-old and a man in ceremonial kit in a palace corridor. I know what you did, and I know what it cost, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. At 22:47, I picked up my pen. I wrote, 11 years, post records, full archive. I looked at it for a moment. Then I wrote underneath it in handwriting that was not quite steady. Start from the beginning. There is a protocol for everything at Buckingham Palace. I used to find this comforting. So somewhere in 11 years of my logs is the specific Tuesday, the specific corridor, the specific rotation schedule that someone patient and resourceful and very well informed used to build a window of access, and then used to send a man with a forged lanyard through it. I don't know yet which Tuesday, I don't know yet which log, but I know it's there. It has to be there, because I logged everything. I am very good at logging things. But the question I have not been able to answer, the one that keeps me at my kitchen table past midnight with a pen and 11 years of paper and a coffee ring I never bothered to clean, is whether the person who gave them that Tuesday knew I was the one keeping the logs, whether they knew I was the record, whether they were counting on it.